Whenever I have new people, I'm in the middle of a series. And the series that I'm teaching is something that is unique, I believe, to my teaching. And so whenever I start, and there are a number of new people, I try to make them familiar with where I am. And I pray that if I do this, I will not confuse you terribly. I believe that the Passover is when God changed the orbit or the axis of the earth. What God calls a Passover is the cosmological coming of Christ, and he changed the orbit or the axis of the earth. I believe there are 8 times God has done this. When he was getting ready to create Adam, he changed the orbit and the axis of the earth. At the time of Noah, he created the orbit and the axis of the earth. At the time of Moses, the Exodus, he changed the orbit and the axis of the earth. And this is the only Passover that he ever taught what he was doing. At the time of Joshua, they were going into the promised land, and he changed the orbit or the axis of the earth. At the time of Isaiah, he changed the orbit and the axis of the earth when the sun went back 10 degrees in the heavens. When Yeshua HaMashiach was hanging on the cross, he changed the alignment of the earth. And this is why this teaching is important and why this teaching is fought so deeply in our culture. Because the 8th Passover is what we call Armageddon. And it's in front of us. And it's coming. And it's just another Passover. 8 Passovers where he changed the orbit and the axis of the earth. Now, we're Messianic. Why am I Messianic? Because I believe in the feasts of Israel. Okay, what feast do I believe in? I believe in the Passover. I believe in unleavened bread. I believe in first fruits. I believe in Pentecost. I believe in Yom Teruah, the blowing of trumpets. I believe that Sabbath is the high holiday festival of God. And I believe the first coming of Yeshua. The first coming of Yeshua is Yom Kippur. That's Yom Kippur. And the second coming of Yeshua is Sukkah, when the great harvest and God is going to restructure the earth. Now, what I've just given you, and this is really important, don't miss it. There are 8 Passovers, and I just gave you 8 feasts of Israel. There's 8 Passovers, and there's 8 feasts of Israel. Some people will say that's a coincidence, an accident, or whatever. I don't believe there's any coincidences with God. That's why we're Messianic. Because we believe there are 8 Passovers, one's coming. And we believe there are 8 feasts of God, and those feasts of God explain the Passovers, and the Passovers explain the feasts of God. That's where we are. Amen. And we're in the middle of this because for those of you who are here after having missed the first 5 lectures, I want to try to pick up and make sense out of what I'm saying. Okay. Everybody here, I believe, knows that in Egypt, at the time of the Exodus, Pharaoh thought he was a god. Is there anybody who wants to argue with that statement? Anybody doesn't find that in their Bible or in the Ten Commandments? And I've often thought, how can any individual think he's God? Why in the world could they have developed a whole theology where this man is trained his entire life that when he dies, he goes up into heaven and becomes God?
Well, Nero did.
Who?
Nero.
Nero.
Nero believed he was God.
Well, he's crazy. He's crazy. He doesn't count. A lot of people think they're God. Hitler thought he was God. They're not. But my point is, there was an entire theology, the entire pharaonic religion, all of the mummies, all of the pyramids, all of that was built around the fact that Isis and Set were waiting for the King Pharaoh to die, to go to heaven, and to then become Horus, the god whose job it was to keep the sun stable in the heavens. Now, part of this came to me when I was reading the Egyptian Book of the Dead, because the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I don't call it the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I call it the Egyptian Book of Immortals. Because it talks about the gods of the Egyptians, and their entire theology was that the Pharaoh had to learn to go and to control the heavens. And I found one psalm in which Pharaoh said, I will keep the Nile River pure. I will prevent storms. I will make sure there is no hail and no fire falling from heaven. I will make sure that the sun stays in its proper alignment. I will make sure that the crops grow. I will make sure that there are no pestilence. I will make sure that people are well. I will make sure there is life. And when I read that, I said, that's exactly what the 10 plagues of God destroyed. Exactly what the king Pharaoh was supposed to do was what God came in and he said to Moses, I'm going to one by one, I'm going to smash him, I'm going to smash him, I'm going to smash him. How in the world could anybody believe that he was destined to go up in heaven and keep the sun in orbit? And more than that, I wondered, if the sun had never been out of orbit, why did you need to do it? Why would you need to do a religion where the king went to heaven to become a god to keep the sun stable if the sun had never been unstable? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to teach you what I taught 2 weeks ago about Noah. The earth became so sinful that God said, I'm going to destroy it. And if you take a look at the earth, and when you look at the newscasters on television, they'll never look the same because they've always got the earth behind them. When you take a look at that, you'll notice how South America fits right into Africa and wraps right around it. How the Horn of Africa fits right into here, and how Greenland and England come right here. And you'll notice how India and how Saudi Arabia come here. And you'll notice how Australia comes up here. And you'll notice this little dimple in Australia just fits Antarctica. And suddenly, if you pull this over a little way, and you pull this over a little way, you've got a four-cornered earth. And the Bible refers to the four corners of the earth. People know the four corners of the earth. What happened? God said, those people have made such a mess. They are so demon-possessed. The demons have so infiltrated them. They have so infiltrated the animals. They have so infiltrated all that man has. They have infiltrated his iPhones. They have infiltrated his televisions. They have infiltrated his satellites. The demons have so filled men that I'm going to have to wipe them all out. And so what God did, it says he passed over and he told Noah to build an ark. Okay. Now I want to point out what I call, and I believe I got it from another author, the path of the Passover. The path of the Passover is always a mountain, and a mountain is always a chain. He came from the south, up through the north, wrapped around, and because the earth is a globe, when he went off this way, he came back on this way, went through here, started pulling this off, and went from here back to here, because it's a globe, and he came. And for 150 days, he took and he pulled it apart. Now, for 40 of those days, it says it rained. Now, why did it rain for 40 days? Because when God pulled this apart from this, he took and he stretched the top covering of the earth, and he spread apart the plates on which all of this was sitting, and you had magma coming up from the bottom. The water rushed in and touched the magma, and it turned to steam instantly. It came up, and the earth had never seen rain until the time of Noah, and for 40 days it rained and rained and rained. And as God passed over, tsunamis went over the whole thing, because God, when he's going to destroy something, he does a really good job. When God's going to get rid of it. Now, I believe that part of this, as you look at what happened there, as the earth was being treated like Michael Jordan's basketball, as the earth was being treated like Michael Jordan's basketball, what wound up happening, the sun took all kinds of crazy arches in the heavens. And so the pharaonic religion developed the concept that what they needed to do was to create a king who would spend his whole life being trained so that the world could never again be out of alignment with the sun, and his whole job was to keep. Therefore, he had to become Horus, the son of Isis and Set, in order that he could maintain the stability of the sun. And that's my theory. I don't know anybody else who comes up with that theory. But it makes sense to me. And as I was studying this, and I was looking at this, the one Passover that God taught on was the Egyptian Passover, Moses. And he gave people laws and statutes and ordinances that they need to find, that they need to follow, they need to go. Now, I did some other studying because God has blessed me. I've been able to do a lot of travel. And I went to South America, went to Guatemala, went to Mexico, went to all these places, and I saw these giant pyramids. And when I went to see all these giant pyramids and I studied all the Mayan culture and I studied the Mayan kings, I learned something unusual. And that is that the Mayans had these giant wars for all their cities, but their wars were never to kill. Their wars were not to capture more land. Their wars were to capture servants. And I've got a big batik on one of my walls that has two kings. One of them is named Fighting Butterfly, and the other named Roaring Jaguar. And they've got these servants there, and the servants have their hands like this, and blood is dripping where they ripped out all their fingernails so they couldn't fight back anymore. They captured all these because what they wanted was to take these servants to the top of the pyramid, to lay them back on a rock with a god named Chakmal, and to take a flint knife and cut out their heart and throw it down. You know how steep the steps are and how narrow the steps are on those pyramids? And they would throw that down, and it'd roll down, then they'd throw the body down, and after they'd done that 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 times, there was a river of blood flowing down there. And they thought that the blood would keep the sun in the heavens still. Now, my question was, why do you develop a religion like that if the sun's never been unstable?
Right.
I started questioning the culture that taught me that everything was always the same as it's always been. That's the principle of uniformity upon which all science, they say, is built. So I started questioning that. And then I did something else. I took a look at the history of the Mayan culture. And you're not going to believe this, but the history of the Mayan culture starts 1600 BC. And before the Mayans in 1600 BC, there were the Olmecs for another 1,000 years BC. So suddenly, you're looking at the Mayans in this section having the same time frame as the Egyptians in this section, and they're all, if you study what happened in 1600 BC, well, there was Abraham in 1800 BC, and I told you there was a Passover of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then you had the Exodus in 1400 BC, and then you had Isaiah, and then you had Joshua going into the Promised Land, and then you had Yeshua on the cross. And suddenly I wound up with the same thing, that when I superimpose the age of the Mayans on the age of the prophets in Israel, they were the same time period.
Where do the Aztecs fit in?
The Aztecs are tag-alongs. They come along about 700 AD,
Okay.
and they have the same religion as the Mayans.
They built the largest pyramid.
Yeah,
Cholula.
yeah, exactly. But their theology was exactly the same, and that's my point. I'm a theologian.
And Joshua speaks about.
We're going to get to Joshua, so don't bring him up. Don't bring Joshua up.
Not yet.
Don't talk about him. We're going to get to him. But my point, do you get, when you superimpose one upon the other, they seem to fit, and biblical history becomes more real when you take a look at world history.
Yep.
Okay? Now, let's do the Bible, because, some of you know I've got difficulty reading. So I ask you to do the reading. We're going to take a look at Joshua. Okay. Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. Joshua 3, verse 1. Could somebody read that to me?
Then Joshua arose early in the morning and set out from Achaia Grove and came to the Jordan, and he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and the Levites bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may not know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. And Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do all the wonders among you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark and the covenant and the cross over before the people. And so they took up the ark and the covenant and went before the people. And then the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, and that they may know that as I was with Moses, I will also be with you. You shall command the priests to bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant, the Lord of all the earth, is crossing over before you in the Jordan. Now therefore take yourselves 12 men from the tribe of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, and that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from the upstream, and they shall stand in a heap.
Okay, good. That's a perfect spot to stop. Because we're seeing the same thing we saw at the Red Sea. At the Red Sea, they started to walk, a wind started to blow, the water was piled up and pushed out of the way, and they walked on dry ground through the water. Here, these people have spent 40 years depending on God. They spent 40 years trying to move forward, and they haven't done very well. And so God says, what I'm going to do, I want you, there's a river flowing, and it's the season of harvest, so the river's flowing as high as it can ever flow. It's flowing as fast as it can ever flow. And you're going to walk into the river. And so he says, what you're going to do, you're going to have the ark in front, you're going to have the priest, then you're going to have the men, and then you're going to have the people behind you. And they started walking, and as soon as their foot touched the edge of the river, the water stopped flowing because the water got pulled up. What causes water to get pulled up?
God.
That's all, you know. And it's interesting because in Joshua, if you read it carefully, half the time it says they got carried over, and half the time it says they walked over, and the other half the time it says they passed over. Because the word Hebrew means people who pass over. And so all the Hebrews, the children of Israel, were passing over. And suddenly the water all just went up and they went across the water. And he said, now you've got 12 strong men, pick up 12 rocks and you carry the rocks. And I like this because when they get to the other side of the river, all the people get through. And as soon as the people come through, the water starts to flow. And they put the 12 rocks there to make an altar. And the nice thing that they do in the Old Testament, they always take and they make a physical monument of the glory of God. He brought us to this point. He got us there. These stones mean that all 12, God didn't save the Jews. I'm sorry to disappoint you all. He saved 12 tribes of Israel, one of whom was Judah.
Amen.
And he gave them a unique covenant because Yeshua was of the tribe of Judah. But he actually gave the law to all the children of Israel. And so they made a monument there. They put it there, and the 12 men made this. Okay. Would somebody read chapter 5, verse 10?
On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover.
Okay, that's sufficient. Pastor, will you please beat another drum? No. That's my drum. That's what God called me for. The children of Israel, when they were going in to conquer Jericho, going into the promised land, they had a Passover. And they stopped eating the matzah, and they started eating the bread of the land. They started eating the grain of the land. They started eating the food of the land. And most people have no idea that this verse is there. Right before they went in to conquer Jericho, the first thing they did was they had a Passover. Okay? Would somebody read 15, 1 to 13?
Susan, your turn.
I got it.
Pastor, you mean 5.
Susan, 5. Yes, 5, 1 to 13. Susan, you're good.
5, 1 to 13?
Yeah.
Really?
So it was when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, that their heart melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives for yourselves and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time." So Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war who had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who had come out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people who were men of war who came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way. So it was, when they had finished circumcising all the people, that they had stayed in their places in the camp till they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Therefore the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day.
Okay, thank you. No, I want to point out why it is so important to me that you understand the law that God gave to Israel, because God never backed away from that law. What happened was that law was misunderstood by the rabbis who were fighting Yeshua, and then when the pontiff in Rome decided that he would replace all of the Hebrew rules with canon law, and he would replace this, they replaced everything that God had taught. And I tend to think that all of these things have a purpose. The children of Israel were told that I want you to circumcise all your infants on the 8th day. Circumcise all your infants, I want you to do it. And I believe there was a purpose in that, because you've got a young man and a young woman who God wants to marry and carry on a godly line. And so what happens in this is the young man gets circumcised on the 8th day. He sheds blood for purity for his wife. Then he marries his wife, and his wife sheds blood for the purity of the family when they make love for the first time. And so you have blood sacrifice as a part of what God has in the family of Israel. Now, it doesn't mean a lot when you got a bunch of kids going to the drive-in movie and fooling around the backseat of the car, and you got, 18 girlfriends, and you live here, and you live there, and you live... And the whole thing gets lost. But God wanted them to understand that marriage was the high point of their life. And that marriage was a marriage unto Him. And so He said, remember the children of Israel came whining to Moses and said, "Look, these kids that you had us bring out of Egypt, they're all going to starve and they're going to die and they're going to be they're all going to be dead because you can't feed them." And God said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You're going to die and they're going to make it through." Mm-hmm. God's very firm. He says, every man who didn't believe will die, and every child shall become a man. And they lived off the hand of God's manna for 40 years. They were fed by God, and they still couldn't believe Him.
Unbelievable.
And they still couldn't believe Him. Okay, now let's roll on, because I want to tell you a story that I know you've all heard, and it's one of the favorite stories people read out of this. Would somebody read Joshua chapter 5, verse 15. Yes.
And the captain of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy."
Okay.
And Joshua did so.
Amen. No, Joshua goes to look at Jericho. Jericho is this dirty, polluted place, and he goes to look at, and when he gets there, there's this soldier standing there, and he's got a sword in his hand. And he's standing there, and he's looking at Jericho, and Joshua says to him, "Are you with them, or are you with us?" He says, "I come to you as the captain of the hosts of the Lord's army." That teaches us something about prayer. Why don't all prayers get answered? Well, because most prayers, we're trying to get God to agree with us. God, if you'll do this, if you'll do this, if you'll do this, if you'll do this, then I'll... No. The purpose of prayer is to get me to agree with Him. He already knows what I'm supposed to do. He knows how I'll be blessed. He knows how His covenant is going to be a blessing for me. I'm going to found a new civilization on the rest of the world. And He knows what I need. So for me to try to tell Him to agree with me, no, prayer is supposed to be me saying, God, what am I supposed to do to get in harmony with you?
Yes, yes.
And we've got it backwards. So anyway, he sees this soldier, the soldier standing there, and he says, I come as the captain of the armies of the Lord. And we're getting where we want to go. We are getting where we want to go. And so, would some, who was just reading there, keep reading and go on and see if you can read the Lord's battle plan. The Lord has a battle plan. Read it.
Now Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out, no one came in. But the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have handed Jericho over to you, with its king and the valiant warriors. And you shall march around the city, all the men of the war, circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. Also 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. Then on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people will shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall flat, and the people shall go up, and everyone straight ahead.
Thank you. No, I get very frustrated when Christians who excommunicated all the Jewish rabbis want to teach us all about this stuff. Because you've got to have an understanding of the Israelite history to understand what he's talking about here. He says, what I want you to do is you're going to take, and for 6 days you're going to walk quietly around the city. The ark's in front. Larry and Raj and Michael and Dr. Tate and Jaime are coming next with their shofars. 6 days they'll walk around. Then, on the 7th day, you walk around more than once, and you start blowing the shofar, and you start screaming and shouting, and suddenly the tectonic plate of Eurasia and Africa shift, and this whole city collapses. Now, this is a question that I believe you all know the answer to. What are the 6 days after Passover called?
The days of unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread. It is a time of purity. And the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is when you go and have a holy convocation unto the Lord. Now I'm going to ask another question that a Christian can't answer. What are the 6 days that they marched around the city? Do you get my picture?
Saying, yes.
You have to understand
Yes.
the law that the 8 feasts. You have to understand what God did, because everything, and this didn't make sense. I had a master's degree in divinity, and this didn't make sense to me till I had taught Torah for about 10 years.
The puzzle piece.
And then I said, why did I miss that? Why did nobody teach me that? Because this was the day of the cleansing of the land, and that's why God said, I don't want you to touch anything. Don't touch the grain, don't touch the food, don't touch the clothes, the gold, the brass, the iron, and the tin you give to God, but don't touch anything else, because it is cursed. It is under demonic influence. And the 6 days are a day of cleansing. Matzah, unleavened bread. Okay? So, and see, this is something that to me is really important. You can't understand this without understanding Torah. And you have to understand the 6 days that they marched around were the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then on the last day, the High Holy Convocation, and then this was neat, because what would happen if you got this city with a giant wall, and you've got this city there, and the Israel army is marching around, you'd have the mayor of the town order all the people off the wall, and he'd order the soldiers on the wall. Go man the wall! And the rest of you get in the center of the village, right? That's the way it would be. And so what collapsed?
The wall.
The wall.
It's interesting because they have found there was one spot where the wall didn't collapse. It stayed up. And this was the section that exactly matches the description of Rahab living between the two walls. It stayed up. Everything else collapsed. But to me, it's so interesting because what God said, the soldiers would all be killed and the people would all be in the center. And God said, don't touch anything because it's demon possessed. Okay, now I told you I was going to talk about a Passover. So would somebody turn to chapter 10, verse 3 to 11.
I got it.
Okay, read it, Larry.
So Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhiah, king of Lachish, and Deborah, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon. He said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites.
Keep going.
On the day of the Lord that gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Adullam. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself of its enemies.
Okay. For 24 hours, the sun did not set. What do you think happened to the Mayan religion when the sun did not rise for 24 hours? It scared the hell out of them.
Oh, yeah.
I gotta tell you something, astrologers went back in time, astronomers went back in time, and they found out that our calendar is off by 24 hours.
Yeah, and it's way off. So, no, but you're correct. It's just, and my point is that he told them, now what has to happen for the sun and the earth to stay in this relationship? Something stronger than the earth and bigger than the sun has to move in there and hold them in a right relationship. And that something may only be 5 feet 10 inches tall, weigh 167 pounds, and had nail holes in his hands.
Amen.
But he took and he held them for 24 hours.
Amen.
So they could destroy this enemy who was familiar with the terrain. So that's why I believe in Passovers.
Yep.
And the next one is what we call Armageddon. I'm going to close now because I'm a little bit beyond where I should be.